Well, today, I mean, some of you have been to my walks also, in fact. So today's session is more about, I would say, not just stories, but also about what I call functional history in Hyderabad. That buildings that we see regularly, but we generally choose to ignore, and stories about those buildings as well. So you might be a little surprised by why I've chosen certain things, but yeah, I hope you all like it. For those of you who don't know, I have been writing about Hyderabad from the last 8 years now. So I am basically obsessed with my city, in a way which I think some of us should also be. It helps our own cities. But yeah, let's go forward. So the first, so okay, I'm also not going to go through the entire city's history today because we don't have time. So I'm going to just break whatever I'm going to talk about through pictures. That's what I'm going to do today. The first photo, of course, I had to choose from the Golconda Fort because those of you who don't know, Golconda is what the city used to be before Hyderabad was built. This is the Bala Hisa Darwaza of the Golconda Fort, but what most of us don't know today, at least we don't really understand that the Golconda Fort that we see is only a small part of the original thing. The actual size is about roughly 6.5 kilometers. One of the most important parts of the fort that we don't always get to see is this door called the Fateh Darwaza. The Fateh Darwaza of the Golconda Fort is the door through which the Mughals actually enter the city or enter in the year 1687 after about 8 months of war with the Golconda Empire. And for those of you who also don't know, I am generally very, and I'm not anti-Mughal. I just don't think they're as important as we think they are, because I really don't care about the Mughals as much as I care about my city. That's always going to be the case. So yeah, the Fateh Darwaza is actually something that is very important. It's currently, I would say, just lying there without any protection. This door, in fact, is a very interesting place in the Golconda Fort precincts. You can actually learn about how the fortification helped the Golconda kingdom fight for nearly 8 months. And the reason why the Mughals enter the fort, by the way, in 1687 in the month of September is not because we lost the war, but because Aurangzeb's army or Aurangzeb basically bribes the gatekeeper. That's how they enter the fort. Okay. Moving on. So this second photo is the Hathiyon ka Jhad, or the baobab tree inside the Naya Khila area of the Golconda Fort. It's over 400 years old, apparently planted there by traveling Africans. That's what the history says. It's also, I believe, half of Naya Khila has been taken over by the golf course. So I would recommend and I would highly request all of you to keep going to that place so that the golf course doesn't take over the rest of it. I'm sure some of your members here, if you are, please request the golf course guys not to illegally take over the Golconda Fort also. Moving on, this is in fact one of the stories of the Golconda Kingdom and the Mughal Empire's last war is also about how the Mughals almost scale up the Golconda Fort towards the end, and they almost managed to climb up the fort and they're about to enter. So apparently this is the Patan Charu Darwaza. This is about a couple of years old, the photo. I don't think the water is there anymore because I believe there's been some more encroachment, but the Patan Charu Darwaza is, I guess, one of the few places of the forts, of the fort's original walls that still had some of the moat left. The fort, I guess, to put it simply, had a lot of water surrounding it in different parts. Unfortunately, again, lost to encroachment. But yeah, apparently this part of the fort is what was almost scaled by the Mughals in the last war. Moving on. The Charminar, of course, I have included because it is the foundation of Hyderabad. There are a lot of stories about the Charminar, etc., etc. I think, see, Muhammad Quli Qutub Shah, the founding king of Hyderabad, the founder of Hyderabad, built the city after the fort was not enough in terms of space. But the story that we generally hear, there are two stories. The first one is that there was a plague inside the fort. The plague story, I believe, goes back to trade with the Portuguese. It says that because of the trade that we had with the Portuguese via the Machilipatnam port, rats on ships had eventually managed to come to the fort, and that's why the fort had the bubonic plague. It could be true. Not going to say it's not necessarily wrong. The other story is actually, I mean, wait, if you just look at show of hands, how many of you all know about the story of Bhagmati here? Okay, great. So we might not necessarily repeat it, but maybe at the end.
Which story?
I mean, see, if you're asking me, I will always say that the story of Bhagmati, as great it is to debate. It is highly, and I say this not because I have a problem with the character, but it's very irrelevant to Hyderabad in terms of how it functions, because it actually makes no difference to Hyderabad's future. Like, how Hyderabad would have been the same. So whether she existed or not makes actually no difference. Yeah, it's a great story. Muhammad Quli had a lover. Brilliant. Muhammad Quli Qutub Shah had many lovers, by the way. So it's not really unusual. I'm just saying that there's a problem with that story because of what it is. But really, not going to get into that right now. Maybe towards the end if we have time, because there are more important things. So this is the tomb of. Actually, no, sorry. Yeah. This is the tomb of the second Golconda king, Jamshed. Jamshed, the only reason I'm including it is because Jamshed is the only among the seven kings who actually indulges in patricide. Basically, he hires an assassin to kill the first Golconda king, who's apparently stabbed 23 times to death. That is the story, by the way. Yeah, sorry, that's next. The other story is about pineapple. So pineapples in Golconda architecture are very, very important. I am basically at this point the unofficial ambassador for pineapple designs in Hyderabad. Pineapples you will find all over the city in Deccan monuments, because pineapples had that position because of historical trade with the with the Portuguese, who were actually importing pineapples from Brazil, and that's how it comes. That's how pineapples become so expensive that apparently the cost of each fruit ran into a few $1,000s at least. That's the story. That's why pineapples eventually end up becoming what they are. They become so rare and important that, and most likely it is possible that the people who did this design on the monument also probably never saw pineapple in real life. That's how expensive it was. So yeah, this is one of the many cannons of the Golconda fort. That's again on the Patansha Darwaza. This I'm just including because the Mughals in Hyderabad actually tried to really destroy the fort, but they really actually failed spectacularly. This cannon is proof of that, because they were not able to actually break open the fort. Yeah, so see, for those of you who don't know, the Nizams of Hyderabad actually have nothing to do with Hyderabad's foundations. They come much later. The first Nizam becomes the Nizam in the year 1724 after the Mughals take over the entire country, and they appoint the Nizams as governors of South India under the Mughals. That's pretty much what was their position. This is actually a very interesting photo I'm just including here, because this is the first Nizam actually going to Nadir Shah, who destroyed Delhi. Right? Nadir Shah actually destroys Delhi so terribly that the first Nizam actually had to intervene. This is him basically prostrating and saying, please stop. So I believe the exact things he would have said is something. So for those who don't, Nadir Shah apparently draws out his sword and puts it out, saying that don't stop killing until he puts it back in on the Sunehri Masjid. And the first Nizam, I believe, tells him that if you have to keep on killing, then you'll have to bring the dead back up again. That's when he stops, it seems, something to that extent. But yeah, so this is actually also one of my other favorite monuments. Monsieur Raymond was a Frenchman. So for those of you who don't know, again, before the British East India Company had settled in Hyderabad, you had both the British and the French who were actually trying to fight for political space here, right? So you might be familiar with the area Musaram Bagh in Hyderabad. So Musaram Bagh is where Monsieur Raymond, the last French commander, has been buried. Apparently the area Musaram is called so because Muslims called him Musa and Hindus called him Ram, and that's how the Musaram Bagh comes up. That's what the story says. But more importantly, there was a commander before Raymond, and Raymond was the most popular one. But there was one more guy named Debussy, who's from Andhra, who's familiar with the phrase Buchodu, Buchi, raise your hands, right? So the story is that Debussy, the man before him, the French commander, was apparently such a fearsome man that women would scare their children, saying, if you don't behave, Bussy will come and take you away. That's how the word Bussy becomes Buchodu, apparently. That's the story. Yeah, so that. Also, Raymond in Hyderabad history, I believe, is also unfortunate, because in the year 1798, when the British East India Company and the second Nizam of Hyderabad signed the Treaty of Subsidiary Alliance, Raymond shoots himself to death because of the fact that the French now have to be disbanded. So that's the end. So the beginning of the East India Company settling down here is the end of the French. That is the other thing. Yeah. So this is the British Residency. That was the first major monument built by the British in Hyderabad after they signed the agreement. it's built in what we call neoclassical architecture, which is basically nothing but revival of ancient Greek architecture. That's what it is. So this is a story. Okay, so take it with a pinch of salt. I do not necessarily believe in it. But the story is that the British also have written, I think probably with a maybe to spoil the Nizam's name or whatever, they've written something like, wherein the second Nizam of Hyderabad, when the British resident had gone to him to construct this building, to ask the permission, it says that the story says that the resident takes a big map of, or a big design, he takes a very big क्या बोलते हैं उसको अभी he takes a very big plan, a floor plan to show to the Nizam. Yeah, so it's what history says is that the second Nizam saw that plan and he immediately said no. So it says that later on he gets confused as to why the second Nizam said no to such a small thing. Like it's just one building, right? So when he asked the Prime Minister, he gets to know that apparently, and again, this is not me saying it, but it says it's written that apparently the second Nizam thought that he wanted to construct a building as big as a state. So that's why it got rejected. So then the advice given to the resident is that take a smaller plan on this much of a size. It says that's when it got approved. Again, I don't think that was the case. I think that was just one of those many stories the British put out to spoil the Nizam's name, but that's pretty much what it is. But also, by the way, this is the place which also has dungeons in Hyderabad that was built in the residency after the first war of independence as well. So if you ever have time, please visit the place. It's a beautiful place. And this is the dollhouse. This is the dollhouse that is just behind the main building. A dollhouse. It's okay. There are 2-3 theories about this. No one actually knows what the purpose is entirely. Some sources mention that this was a replica built before the actual monument itself, which is a very common practice for European monuments. Some say that this was built as a dollhouse because it was built as a play station for children. And the other third story is that the British resident James Achilles Kirkpatrick, who had married a Muslim woman here called Khairunisa in the late 18th century, apparently built it for his wife, who was not, it says, allowed to enter the main building. So there are 3 theories of this. So again, it is actually open right now, so you can also visit this place. It's open from 10 to 5 if anybody wants to go. So this is actually something I am more interested in. So what you see on the left is basically a lion, and on the right is the actual thing that it was before it became a lion. It's a sphinx. So it's a sphinx according to ancient Greek mythology, because the Egyptian mythology has a half male, half lion. This is from Greek mythology. So when you go, I think some of you have been to this place, right? So if you go there, you'll see the first 2 things that you see are 2 lions glaring at you. So it says that somewhere after 1850, 1860, it says, we don't exactly know when, but it was changed from a sphinx to a lion because it says that, well, basically the Muslim nobility who did not really want to see 2 half-naked women staring at their faces. So that's what it was. It was a bit of a, I guess, patriarchal problem in that sense, you could say. But yeah, but this is from the Empress Gate behind it, so that sphinx is still there. It's been restored also. It looks it looks great. And this is actually one of my most favorite tombs in Hyderabad. See, a lot of you, in popular culture, we love to talk about how Hyderabad's Nizams were rich, blah blah blah. But it is the last Nizam of Hyderabad who was the richest man in the world, right? I believe 1937 is when he comes on the cover of Time magazine because of his wealth. 6th richest man in the world, I think, in history. But there's a lot of background before the last Nizam actually becomes the richest man. And that's the fact that the state of Hyderabad was actually in debt for quite a while. So if you remember what I had mentioned, that when the British settled down here, they signed an agreement with the Nizams, right? The treaty is called the Treaty of Subsidiary Alliance, which meant nothing but that the Nizams or the Hyderabad state agreed to pay the British 24.17 lakh rupees a year to keep 6 battalions of troops. That's the whole agreement. But the funny thing is that after the agreement was signed in the year 1798, the third Nizam onwards, Sikandar Jah, they don't actually have the money to pay the British back entirely. So they start borrowing from a bank called Palmer and Co. Palmer was run by somebody called William Palmer, who was essentially loaning the Nizams. It saves about roughly 2 lakhs a month at very high interest rates. So effectively, Palmer and Co. is what ends up loaning the Nizam so much money that the state actually goes into debt, and it is the East India Company that bails out the Nizam by paying off the bank, and in return, what is Andhra today is given off to the British. That's how Andhra gets attached to the Madras presidency. Okay, so this is the grave of William Palmer, who, in spite of all of the heavy debt that he put in Hyderabad in, I believe got a pension after he retired also. He is buried in St. George's Church in Abbots. So if you ever end up going there, you can take a look at his grave. And this is actually one of my favorite places. This is the first church that was built by the British when they settled down in Hyderabad. This is the St. John's Church, built in 1813, or called the Church of St. John the Baptist. Also a very interesting place because this is the only church built in what you call Tuscan architecture. The important story about this place is how first it also shows that the early churches were actually not built for locals but only for the British soldiers who were living here. The second is a story from the First War of Independence. It says that the rule in the church was that if you have to go in as a soldier, you have to keep your guns out. You had to keep your guns out. It says that because of the 1857 War of Independence, one time when they had gone for prayers, all the guns get stolen by the locals. And for those of you who don't know, there was an attack on the British at the residency also in 1857 that the British were able to fight off because of Salar Jung I, who informed the British East India Company that there will be an attack here. But yeah, so this was the church. It also has one of the only, I believe, the only functioning pipe organ. Pipe organ is what is something that is like a 16 by 20 feet machine. It has about 250 or 500 pipes inside. So it's a very difficult thing to play. As you can see, it has 2-3 keyboards. It is something that most churches in Secunderabad or Hyderabad actually were fitted with. But I think most of the pipe organs here are completely spoiled. So this is the only one that functions, and they still use it every Sunday for service. So you can actually go around 8:39, they'll be using it. So that, yeah. And from what is mentioned on that pipe organ, it was apparently installed by a Muslim man in 1908. And I believe someone from Calcutta comes every year to fix it for repairs. This is also a very interesting church. This is, I believe, the first church built for Irish Catholics, or for Catholics actually. Probably the oldest. I think this is the oldest church, Catholic church in the entire city, called the St. Mary's Basilica. I don't know if some of you have been there or not, but the church was actually built by a man called Father Daniel Murphy, who was an Irishman. And you know, one thing about the British or the East India Company is that if you look at our history, especially in cities like Bangalore, you will notice that the Irish and Scotsmen are actually a lot more kinder to Indians, like in general, more than the British. I guess the Irish could actually sympathize a little bit with us because of what they also went through. That's why even Kirkpatrick, the man who married Clarenceau, was actually a Scotsman. He was not British. So here it says, no, not English. So he's Scotsman. I mean, they were in the UK, but Scotland is a different country. Yeah. So here, apparently Daniel Murphy, when he came to Hyderabad, he wanted to build a church for the Irish Catholic soldiers living in under the British. And you know, it's very funny, we don't really think of it, but the Protestants and Catholics actually had a lot of issues between themselves, even going back to 200 years back in the UK. So the same issues are playing out here as well. So it says that this Daniel Murphy, who was sent to build a church, the foundation of the church has a very funny story where it says that Daniel Murphy was a man who was trying to build a church for this Irish Catholic soldiers, but because he couldn't find place, apparently he was secretly going around in the night trying to find workers and trying to find a space, but the British then report him to the Nizam, and then he gets called and gets pulled up, and then where he says, listen, I want to build a church, please give some space. That space is then given to him. But apparently, even after 1840-41, when the church began construction, the British soldiers did not let them be and burned down the roof 3 times before it could be fully completed. So yeah, the church went through quite a bit. Also, this is, I believe, it's called a minor basilica because it has been, well, sanctified by the Vatican. So there's actually an archbishop who sits and goes and votes for the Pope also every time something happens. So yeah, so it's a pretty important church in that sense. Moving on. Yeah, that is William Palmer's tomb, by the way, in the Abbey Church. Oh yeah, so this church is actually called the St. Luke's Hindustani Church. I don't know if you've all seen it in Abbott. It's in Chiragali Lane. Coincidentally, so this church was apparently only a small chapel until about 100 years ago. It was built by missionaries for Muslim converts to Christianity. So it's called the Hindustani Church because the service to this day happens in Urdu. Because Muslim converts would not know any other language, that is why the service began in Urdu, and to this day you can actually go at around 9:30 on Sunday. It's open to everybody. Recently who passed, Mr. V.K. Baba, who passed away recently, was his former civil servant and also who wrote history books. He was a member of that church. So something like that. You have all those things inside there. I mean, yeah, this is something I just put here because for me, I've also done a lot of work on the Hyderabad 1908 Musi River floods. For those of you who don't know, in September 28, 1908 is when you had, I believe, the worst recorded flood in Hyderabad history. Unofficial reports say that some 15,000 people had died. It happened in Hyderabad because the Musi River spilled over a couple of times. Just to give an understanding, like 2020, what floods we had in Hyderabad was about 7 to 8 inches of rainfall that we recorded. So in 1908, in the first 24 hours, you had about 12.9 inches of rainfall in the first 24 hours, and then about roughly close to 19 inches on the second day. So that was a very, very, very terrible flood that took place. And this is a marker at about at my height, about roughly 6.6 feet maybe. But there are markers like this that are about even as high as 17 to 18 feet in height in the old city. So that was how high the water went. And the story here is that it happened, the flood took place during the time of Mehboob Ali Pasha, the 6th Nizam of Hyderabad, who was, I would say, known if you read his history, you will see that he was a lot more flamboyant than probably anybody else's entire life in that lifetime of his. It says that Mehboob Ali Pasha there are two stories. One is that apparently he was told by the Pandits around him that you have to go make an offering into the river. So it says that he goes to the highest point, or he goes to the Tipu Khan bridge and makes an offering, and the water immediately starts receding back. The second story is that because he was so affected by the floods, he himself personally took out his car and went around helping people. It says that anybody who pushed his car, it got stuck in the mud, received some money as a consequence. But yeah, that flood actually, by the way, also changes Hyderabad. After the flood in 1909, the government calls Vishweshwaraya from Karnataka to kind of flood-proof Hyderabad. That's why Usman Sagar and Himayat Sagar were built, to block the water from coming into the river. And that is how Hyderabad also gets modernized after that. So, High Court, Usmania University, Unani Hospital, everything as we know, all the most recent structures from before independence were all built after the flood as the modernization of Hyderabad. This is actually a photo that even I was very happy to find. This is a photo of the Abid's shop. Abid Evans was the Jewish valet of the 6th Nizam of Hyderabad. Please take a photo. I'll move. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, Abid Evans. So how many of you have been to Falaknuma Palace? How many of you are rich enough to go to Falaknuma Palace? Okay. So Falaknuma was built by the 6th Nizam, Mehboob Ali Pasha's brother-in-law, right? Vikharul Umrah. So, I believe it was a very fancy palace when it was built. It says that it had flush toilets as late as the 1890s, right? So, Falaknuma is an entirely European palace in terms of design, and the story is that Mehboob Ali Pasha, after it was constructed, goes to stay there for a couple of days, which becomes 2 weeks. And so my point is that his brother-in-law, Vikharul Umrah, had to give it up to him after, because the 6th Nizam liked it so much. But Abid Evans, the valet, comes into the service of the brother-in-law much earlier itself when the palace is built, and that's how Abid also ends up coming into the service of the 6th Nizam, because it gets passed on to the palace, right? So Abid's shop was the go-to place for people who would end up in the government service, so they had to buy clothes and this and that. And I guess the other story is that Abid was also the man who supplied alcohol to Mehboob Ali Pasha. And the story is that he unfortunately died due to alcohol poisoning in the year 1911. That's how Mehboob Ali Pasha died, is what it says. But more importantly, there's a whole story of, how many of you have heard of this Jacob diamond? Right? So the story of this 186 carat, that I think some of you would have read, that how the last Nizam used it as a paperweight in his room. Every time somebody would come, they would see it, right? So the story actually goes back to the time of Abbott's, where from what we know, Abbott Evans comes into contact with this merchant called Jacob, who has this massive diamond, which then he asks Abbott's कि अगर किसी को होना क्या है कि वो देखो बोल के. So the sixth Nizam is shown a copy of the diamond, and it says that Mehboob Ali Pasha likes it so much that he asked to see the real thing. अब क्या होता वो जब diamond, it takes about roughly a year for the diamond to come to Hyderabad, but he had to pay up half the money before it actually comes here. So it says when the diamond actually comes, the sixth Nizam says Nako, and he doesn't like it. So that's when there's a whole issue, and they go to court, and the Nizam actually ends up losing, and that is why the diamond gets stuck with them. It says that Usman Ali Khan just finds it somewhere after he becomes the king, and then starts using it as a paperweight. That's the whole story. Abbott, yeah. So I believe Abbott is where Hollywood would have been. That's what I believe. That's where it would have stood today. Yeah. So Mozambique market, I just put here for a simple joke. So I don't know how far it's supposed. A couple of people who are very old, long ago, told me this. Apparently, so Mozambique market is named after Mozambique, the last Usman Ali Khan, the last Nizam's second son, younger son. Apparently, the younger son had turned up a little late. Actually, late by quite a while, like a typical Hyderabadi. And says the last Nizam was very unhappy during the inauguration. That's all. That's the story. But in a way, you could also say that this is Hyderabad's first mall. Mozambique market was, in a way, one of the more modern markets built in the city. So, luckily, still standing. Falaknuma, I'm just including for the Abbott story, so that, I mean, yeah, if you have time, if you have the money, please go there. It's actually a very fancy palace, but it's a great place to visit at least once. So I think all of you should go there. Usmania Hospital. There are a couple of things, I think this debate is always going to exist. Not that there's a problem with Usmania Hospital. Also, we're very happy that the hospital is going to stand and not be torn down anymore. Number one. Lasania Hospital, so I don't know, I believe Usmania biscuits were originally made in the 1950s in Usmania Hospital, for doctors of the hospital who wanted soft snacks for patients. That's what we know. I don't think Usmania biscuits are named after the last Nizam, but some people believe that apparently that is what he liked. I don't think that's the case, but if you think that's the case, also no problem. Please believe in it. I'm just telling you from what I know. And this tree is also, if you remember the 1900 flood that I mentioned, there is a tamarind tree that has a board that says that about 150 people climbed up the tree during the floods. So yeah, you can actually visit that. It is open, so you can just go check it out whenever you want to as well. It's still standing, luckily. So this is I think some of you who follow me on Instagram know I go to Grand Hotel quite a lot, but the reason I'm including it is because the outer facade of Grand Hotel is actually as it has been since from the beginning, 1935. Grand Hotel is one of the, I believe, the oldest surviving Irani cafe/restaurant in Hyderabad. There are some pretty interesting stories from the, that is the reason why it's part of our Abbott's walk also. I don't know if you all know this, the former Chief Minister of Andhra, Anjaya, used to apparently have a separate table for him every day there. One of the small things. But Grand Hotel also has fairly good Usmania biscuits, by the way, if you ever want to go try it. And it has very consistent biryani, that's why I like it, if you're wondering why. But more importantly, that is I don't know if you all have been there or around it, in the lane opposite Grand Hotel, there is something called the Reddy Hostel. They never let me take a good photo from the outside, that's why I don't have it right now. But Reddy Hostel was built in the late 1800s by Raja Raj Bahadur Ram Venkatram Reddy, who was a Kotwal of Hyderabad, and I quote unquote, it was built for poor, I believe it was built for poor students. Some people say for poor Reddy boys, which is very oxymoron. I know it's an oxymoron. But if you go to Reddy Hostel, there are 2-3 interesting things there. But first you will see inside is that the inaugural plank is actually in Persian and not in Urdu, right? Second, Reddy Hostel is also the birthplace of the CPI in Hyderabad. So believe it or not, the CPI, you can't believe it, sorry. The Congress and CPI were banned actually by the last Nizam's government. Around 1938 is when the Congress formed, and 1939 is the CPI formed. Initially, what is the CPI? And right now maybe it's incomprehensible, but Makhdoom Mohyuddin, Alam Kundmiri, Jawad Rizvi, these are all founding members along with Ravi Narayan Reddy, Batambal Reddy. CPI was actually mostly, or half of it was run by Muslims in Hyderabad at least at that point of time. So right now we won't really think of it because it's only the MIM, but MIM comes much later. It's the CPI that was actually quite powerful. So yeah, so apparently the CPI people, because, so from what I know, it says that Irani cafes were also kind of taboo for people, especially for the upper class, to go to and have food and chai. It says that, like, quote unquote, अच्छे घर के लोग बाहर खाना नहीं खाते, is what was the saying back then. But it says that the CPI would actually go to Grand Hotel quite often to make their plans. At that, so for those of you who don't know, 1946 to 1950, 1946 to 51 is when we have something called the Telangana Armed Struggle, which is a peasant uprising. So it says a lot of the planning was done in Irani cafes, including Grand Hotel as well. So that is the significance of this building. Yeah, this is the map of the Hyderabad state. The last map of the Hyderabad state, if you notice, it has what is today as Telangana, 5 districts of Maharashtra and 2 districts of Karnataka. So that would be about roughly 16 districts, 82,698 square miles of land, and that's the last area. So yeah, that is the photo of the flood from 1908. So there were some images post the flood that were taken. Like, you can actually understand the level of destruction that existed back then. That's unofficially, it says, from what we know, it says 65,000 buildings were destroyed in 2 days. So I believe that was quite possibly the worst flood. Hopefully it won't happen again. Now, the government plans to make Musi flowing. I mean, it wants to redevelop Musi, but I highly doubt that's going to happen. But yeah, so I've also included the last Nizams. I mean, the only part remaining of the palace today, the King Koti Palace, is where Usman Ali Khan, the last Nizam, stayed and lived and died. I believe a good chunk of the palace. See, if you all remember, I don't know if you all remember, a couple of years ago, there was a lot of it was in the media because this place actually has been sold to private parties. There was actually a whole incident where some gundas had come and tried to take it over, etc., etc. But yeah, so Usman Mansion is I believe the part where Usman Ali Khan would meet people and stay. So it says that some lot of popular accounts. I don't know if you all have actually read enough books, but I mean books on Usman Ali Khan enough, but there are some very what is the right word here? Not necessarily good things written about. I mean, the fact is that Usman Ali Khan was the richest man in the world, right? So when people would meet him, they would often be very surprised. They like, not phate, apparently people have seen him wearing clothes with holes in it. So they would be very amused. Like, there are photos. Unfortunately, I couldn't put that right here, but there are photos from Life magazine from 1937, 1938, which come. There's a photographer who comes out from abroad to attend Usman Ali Khan's 25th Silver Jubilee anniversary, right? Right? So the first photo of him standing is saying it says something to the effect of the world's richest man through the cheap party, because they're all amused that his party is not as grand as it should be for the richest man in the world. So same thing, apparently people who would come here would not be very impressed with the way he would live. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, I don't have a problem with that. I think he's a great man because he lived his life, saved a lot of money, built Hyderabad also oversaw the feudal system of Hyderabad. Not saying that's great, but at least to give credit where it's due, he did develop what is Hyderabad today. So that's at least that for that. Irani chai is actually the reason why this photo is here. Irani chai is probably loaded with a lot of sugar these days, but Irani chai, for those of you who don't know, is not what people actually have in Iran. People in Iran drink black tea. Yeah, so it's from what we know, when the British in India start exporting chai patti, tea leaves, they don't know what to do with the leftover kachra. That is the tea dust. That is what we have chai with. Right? So basically they actually start making us have chai for free with the tea dust for so long that we get used to it. And then they start selling it back to us. That's the other bit. So what happens in Hyderabad is that in the early 1900s, when a lot of Iranians start migrating out primarily for work because there's famine and other issues that are plaguing them. Many of them come to Hyderabad because it's not only because of the language, the official language was Persian earlier and then Urdu later. It is also the fact that Hyderabad has historical ties to Iran. That's why a lot of Iranians come here for work, because it's easier also for them to live here. So when they come here, they actually realize people are not drinking black tea, and that is when That is how Irani chai, it is known as Irani chai because of the Irani cafe owner is born. When they start boiling the black tea in the milk, that's what happens. Also, apparently, Khara biscuits were the original biscuits sold in cafes and not Usmania biscuits. Usmania are actually a little bit later. So that is the Irani chai story. And I believe Garden Cafe in Secunderabad used to be where the British would actually end up buying snacks and they would be passing by and going to Hyderabad from there. So that if you have not gone to Garden, please go to Garden. Chai is only nice, food is not great. And this is my favorite place actually, Mehboob Radio Service in Hyderabad. I believe is the only place that actually fixes old radios and sells them, vintage radios. It's been 1948 is from where it has been in in Chatta Bazaar. But I believe the place originally was a little goes back to the 1920s from what I can understand. Mehboob Radio Service has been around for close to a century and they literally can fix every single radio that you take there. So if you have an old radio, please take it there. And the reason I'm putting this photo here is because the current owner who is the second son of the original owner says that Hitler's speeches used to play on these radios during World War II. So people have apparently heard Hitler also in Hyderabad. So that I think that's it because we have to shut also. So that is the last photo. If you have questions, please ask. I'm happy to answer.
Can you please come this side?
Sorry, I'll come.
Can you hear me? Hello? Yeah. So thank you, Yunus. That was a whirlwind tour of Hyderabad. So there were so many things packed in. Very interesting. And I also like this alternate of you can believe this or you can't, you needn't believe that. Because history is often like that. You know, history is all made up of stories and sometimes there is the official established history and then there is also the alternate history. So I guess Hyderabad history will be a bit of that always. If anyone has any questions, we can't take too many, just a few. Yeah.
Hi, Yunus. Thanks for that engaging session. My question was, you said in the late 1800s, the state was actually in a lot of debt. And you shared that story.
Sorry.
The Hyderabad state and the Nizams were in debt. And in the next 30 to 40 years, and then there was a flood in between in 1908. How does he becomes the richest man in these 30 to 40 years?
To put it simply, feudal tax collection from farmers. So the thing is, if you look at the state history, Salajang I, who becomes the prime minister in 1853, was made the prime minister to check what is happening with the money. So he realizes that there are two issues. One is the state is in debt because of the burden that they have to pay the British. Second is the fact that they realize that the taxes being collected by the Jagirdars of the state are not coming in properly. So Salajang I makes have you ever thought about the fact that the position of a collector is actually the most useless position that exists? Right? What is a collector? Why do we have a collector today? Right? It makes no logical sense to have a district collector today. Like, क्या collect कर रहा हूँ मैं? कुछ भी नहीं. Right? It's basically supposed to be an administrative position for somebody who's looking after a district. That is what it is. So the equivalent of a collector. The collector is basically a colonial position that was put in by the British, right? So the equivalent here is Talukdar. Salajang I put the Talukdar to make sure that the Jagirdars are paying money properly, and that is how that builds up, and that because the money is coming in, that's how the last one becomes greatest. So feudalism was, it's there everywhere in India. It's not only Hyderabad, but Telangana had the worst feudal system. So, sorry. The communists really grew here because of the feudal system that they were able to, fight against, because it was basically green grass for them to take over. They did take over the whole state. I believe 4 communists from here went to meet Stalin to ask for help also, but Stalin refused, of course. But anyway, sorry, anybody else?
Any other question?
2 people there.
Hi, Yunus.
Hi.
Can you throw a light on the name Hyderabad, how it came?
Okay, see, I will sit now. See, first of all, Hyderabad. Yeah, I think the more popular story is that Muhammad Quli, the founder, married Bhagmati, and because Bhagmati converted and became Hyder Mahal, that's why it becomes Hyderabad, right? But thing is, most likely the word Hyderabad comes from Hyder. Hyder is the second or one of the names of Imam Ali. Imam Ali was the Prophet Muhammad's son-in-law and cousin, who Shia Muslims also follow. So, because the Qutub Shahis were Shias, I believe that's where Hyder comes from. That's pretty much what I can say. Because beyond that, I will tell you that if you really want to dig into that, it's going to be futile, honestly. So yeah. Yeah.
Hi Yunus, on this. If you had to review the recently released movie Razakar Files in one line,
So waste of
especially in terms of
waste of time, I would say, because I mean, see, if you know, like, if you're somebody who does not know the history, then you will definitely be like, see, if you already have a mindset of hate, you will definitely go watch it, right? And you'll be like, wow, amazing movie. But it's like Padmavat. Padmavat also is a story, right? Same thing. So I mean, if you read history and then you go watch the movie Razakar, you'll be like, "Inhe kya to bhi kar raha bol ke." That's what you will think, because they've taken literal communist heroes and turned them into anti-Muslim characters, right? So that's what I was really not surprised at this point. You can expect more of it. So that's what it is. But no one really seems to care. But it will be there on the internet for someone who wants to go watch it later. That's the problem. But there's also a different movie made in Marathi by. So if you look at our history, right? So the Hyderabad, Karnataka, Hyderabad, Bombay, old areas actually have been having this thing. They've been celebrating Hyderabad Liberation Day from decades. So already बना लिया एक मज़ाकार बोल के पहले अपन लेट बना. Anyway, so yes, the last question that you have before we get done, yes, please. You ask for it.
Okay, one last.
This is more of a reflective question to you. So we all read history and then we know very little bit of it because there's a lot history can offer. And when you start digging deep, like you go into this rabbit hole, right? And how do you try to, like, do you do this objectively? Like, do you try to look at history objectively or do you take a position? No, so I mean, you would have your own personal positions about history, right? So, is it a struggle to navigate that? Like, do you try to be objective intentionally or?
No, I mean, see, the thing is, for me, I like history, but I like history also because I love my city. That's the difference, I would say. So, I mean, this applies to everything. There's always going to be a bias like this.
Yeah.
I might write something about history because I am biased about something, but within that sphere, there is a lot of rationality involved. If you're like very careful about what, like if let's say you're going to look to write something nice about Hyderabad, but if you find that it's not necessary, okay, example, most of the people who get interested in history here end up first always going and reading about the Nizam, and they'll be like, wow, amazing lives. But the moment you dig underneath, you will find feudalism there. So if you ignore that part, then you are being subjective and you are being biased. But if you write what you see honestly, it's fine.
Yeah.
Then yeah, that's pretty much it, right? Like you can add your perspective. It's always there.
Yeah.
But you can't change facts. That's the whole point.
Yeah, so for someone who's consuming what you're saying, and most of it was very cognitively overwhelming also because I have not ever heard such a discourse before.
Come from my walks.
And yeah, I would love to. So this is, so the question is coming more from there. How much of what you're saying do I completely rely on? And
You should not rely on. You should go read about it yourself. You should actually go to the original source of things if you can always. The internet is actually a great resource. It's not like I'm doing anything great. I'm just putting in 10% more than what anybody else would. But I understand you have your own lives, so it's not necessary that you have to. Because tomorrow if I write something wrong, you can easily catch me and say, "Ye galat hai bol ke." So that's, of course, people do it. I'm not saying people don't lie, but yeah, it's your job to also corroborate it. And that mostly happens when you are researching the same subject. You end up finding you can't hide those things. You will get caught.
yeah.
So that.
Yeah. Also, history has happened many years ago when we weren't even there. So
No, there's
it's
also
always
contemporary history, like there's something more recent stuff. There's like stuff like 500 years ago, right? So it depends on what you're looking at also.
Yeah.
Right. So that. I hope that helped. Thank you all for coming.